Right, so we're going to jump in and talk about file management and just kind of keeping everything nice and neat and clean. File management is going to be a major workflow that you're going to have to get comfortable with because you need to understand like what file types are being created when you create a session and which files are actually important to your session, like which ones are going to keep it intact. So I think the first thing, if we really start this conversation off right, that we have to consider is that when you open up your Mac, and anytime you open up your Mac, it tends to look like this. And it puts you in the Finder. And if you hit Command and hold Tab, it'll cycle you through elements of which applications are open. Sorry, you can't see this on this screen, but you can see it on the other, on my other screen at the moment. So I'm sorry, I'm missing that. But when you select your Finder, if you hit Command N or File, New Finder window, you get to the File Manager. Essentially, you're able to get to all of the files that you need. And the most important pieces here are really keeping an eye on when you create a session, where does it go? So immediately in Pro Tools, if we go back to Pro Tools for just a second, the big thing that we're looking at here is, so when you're actually creating your new session, you know, there's a moment where you hit Create New that asks you, well, where is that session being saved? Let me just show you this. And later on, when you get really comfortable with this and you start working with this a lot more, you will obviously know where everything is at. But kind of an easy way to do that from the get-go now, and something I would encourage you to do, is at your first step, go to the Finder. And wherever you are, whether you're on the local drive or you're on an external drive, make a new folder specifically for this university, this college, and this class. And so like what it would look like, it would be very simple. You can do it on your desktop, you could do it in your folders, or again you could do it in your hard drive. And you know, a lot of people say try to keep stuff off the desktop because of file reasons in terms of management, but at the simplest, that might be an easy place to go. Or you could go into your documents, but you're just going to go and hit new folder, and you're going to create a folder set here. Oops. You know, and you could just type in Loras College and then go in, make another new folder. You do it from the top menu here, new folder, and this is your Audio 110. And then it could also be as simple as, once you've done that, you know, if you want to do week by week kind of folders, you're going to do them there. When you're creating your new session, though, or you're working with new audio, you want to be saving these things to those folders already. So one thing I don't necessarily prefer to do is I don't prefer to jump into Pro Tools and start making folders from here. I prefer to go into my hard drive, make sure wherever I'm going to be saving stuff, it already has a place for me when I get there. So when I go in and I just say, all right, like I'm going to save my session for today, I'm going to type in day one. It'll just say it's going to be, you know, local storage and you know, whatever sample rate settings are. Then it's going to kick me over and say, well, where do you want to go? And that's where I'm going to want to make sure I know how to navigate where I save. So if you can see on the left, you can see some places on here to navigate this, and you can see, oh, there's my desktop. And these favorites are just areas. There's sections of the hard drive that are most commonly used. And so there's my Loras College, there's my 110. This is where I want to save it. You know, so I can create my session and save a session there. And that's where things are going to be saved. So as I make new files, whether they're MIDI or they're audio, those files are going to be created there. But in the file management, that's not the end of the story. Okay. First of all, we want to make sure that they're named whatever they should be named. But let's just say for a second I decided to bring in some files, whether I import them or record them or whatever. I'm just going to bring some in just to make it easy. And you know, I'll just bring in some drum files from this session real quick. And away we go. So those files are going to come in a second. All right, good. Okay. So, oh yeah, and then there were some up here that need to be opened. Basically, one of the things that you need to kind of be mindful of with this is when you're making files, the minute you start recording new stuff, you need to make sure you name it. And that way, it'll take on, that file name will take on that name. So like when I'm looking at this one's the AC Guide Scratch. I don't know what it was actually called the moment it was recorded. Let me go look at it real fast. Okay, you can see if I double click on the file, I can see the actual file name is AC Guide. Okay, so I know what those files look like. What I'm going to do very quickly though is, just because these all got brought in, I'm going to go look at my folder to tell me what's in day one so far. And what we should see is, oh yeah, there we go. Here's our day one. We brought in some files, and then this is where it becomes important. If I enter into my day one folder that I just created, using, by creating the session, what Pro Tools does is it creates a whole host of folders. And you need to be kind of familiar with where these are and what these are. This Pro Tools file, this is the actual Pro Tools file. So when you click this is what opens the Pro Tools session. But this is a session index only. It doesn't have anything else on it at all. So if you move this one around by itself, you will have no audio carry with it because it doesn't embed it inside of this session. What it does instead is it puts audio in the audio files folder. So you can actually go see those audio files that correlate with these channels here. They're all right here. And that's great because that means we can move them or manipulate them outside of being inside of the session. And then if we bounced any clips for export, that's where they would go. Any groups that we maybe created with our clips, that's where they would go. Session file backups. Your system should automatically be set to do session file backups maybe every 5 minutes, and they would end up in this folder. Any video would end up in this folder. And this wave cache is just to speed up the load process. Notice what's not here, though, is as soon as you start making MIDI files, the MIDI files actually do get embedded into the .ptx, the Pro Tools session file folder, or the actual file itself. So MIDI will stay with this. So, even if nothing else, if you don't record anything else, MIDI will be here. But it is up to you to manage your files. So it's very important from day one and from the start as you start working with projects that you label your folders. As you get into a new class, label a new class folder so you know where everything's at. There's not any question. It's pretty simple. And even if you have to put silly little labels on it, label everything. I mean, label anything that you possibly can. Now, one note about that. All of these folders are not allowed to be touched. These are off limits in terms of relabeling or renaming from here. Anything you do has to be done from this side in the session. So if I decided, oh, I want to label this something else, I want to call this a different file name, I have to double click on it. I have to jump in here and I have to relabel it from here. I cannot, I can't label anything else from anywhere else, because if I do, what Pro Tools is doing, what this file is doing here is it's indexing all the things here. So if you change any of the names, especially if you change the folder names, but definitely anything inside of these, if you change them here, they won't update here and they'll actually get lost immediately. All of a sudden the session is going to have a problem. So a couple of quirky things about that, and some just major rules in terms of this. You have to know where the files are supposed to be saved. And each time you're done with a session, you need to go back to that folder and make sure that it's been updated. It says, oh, it was updated today at what time? And then if it was supposed to have audio, go look and make sure it exists. If the audio seems lighter than it should be, if you hit Command-I, it'll tell you how big that folder is in terms of size. If it feels lighter than it should be or smaller than it should be or missing things, then it might be. It might just be. And so you have to be very careful about where things are being saved. Additionally, you are not allowed to move anything unless the session is closed. So I can't copy or move or whatever. I can't say, oh, you know what, I'm going to move this to a different location. A good example would be, oh, I made a new folder, but I titled it wrong, and you want to go correct it. Yeah, you can't do that when you're in the session. So as soon as you want to do that, you got to get out of Pro Tools. You got to quit, or at least quit the session. Session's got to be closed. From here now, you can rename anything you'd like. Now notice what happened. It eliminated all the folders that it didn't need anymore, because it realized, oh, you didn't use those. Great. Okay, so now we have a more slim package of file folders that just kind of shows us what we need. And you can see there's our first backup from a moment ago. So in order to actually share this, when you're done and when you're working with these, if you're submitting assignments into me or anywhere else, there's a couple of requests that might come down. One of them might be just do an export bounce. You'll be shown how to do that, and you'll only need to share one file. If you're needing to share the whole thing, it needs to be this whole folder. And you can see at this moment, this folder is 236.8 megabytes. So it's important to make sure that whatever you do, you're doing it in this complete package, and you're being mindful of, what is that folder hierarchy that's supposed to be, used in this instance. And the other thing is with file management, you have to keep it clean. You have to You have to maintain a sense of order. So labeling is important. Labeling the tracks. So when you label those tracks in Pro Tools, they keep you from having tracks with weird names when you go to your audio files folder. You know what I mean? If you label them, you'll understand which ones they are. And that becomes a super important thing. So I'm going to open this back up. And one last thing I wanted to mention here is that as we start to kind of talk about the file management portion, one of the things that Pro Tools allows us to do, which is really quite fantastic, is we can actually drop comments in the tracks to tell the mix engineer, the operator, the mastering engineer, whoever's using whatever, if they open up the session, they should be able to know what's what and how to get around. Well, normally in a small session, that's not a big deal. Like in this session, it really wasn't that mysterious. Like you look at the tracks, there's a couple of things and not much, right? But if I go to the mix window, there's a comment field down below, and this is often very useful to tell us what the tracks are even for. So notice this track was called AC Guide Scratch, okay? A lot of times you're going to write a note here. This is a scratch track. Notice it doesn't really carry over very well. It's a scratch track, do not use. So it might be there as a guide, but not for much. Notice that there's two kick drum tracks over here. So this could be, a lot of times we'll say, oh, this is the kick that's on the mic Beta 52, and this is the kick mic Beta 91, right? So essentially that's how we kind of figure out which ones are which. We put these notes down below, and that makes it easy for whoever picks up to be able to tell what's going on. Because even looking at the file folders, there's only so much detail here. And so a lot of times we have to write extra notes here to manage it and make sure we're keeping track of which ones we're using and how we're doing it. So this becomes a piece of like what you're putting together for your file management and how you're working through with your Pro Tools sessions.